when buffs hurt more than help. In this video, we're taking a look at times Blizzard tried to improve the game by buffing underperforming cards, only for the changes to backfire, and for Blizzard to have to nerf the cards again. Our first cards come from the infamous Rise of the Mech event in 2019. Luna's Pocket Galaxy and Extra Arms. Luna's Pocket Galaxy, perhaps the most infamous card of all time that was buffed, became overpowered, and then had to be nerfed again. In 2018, with the Boomsday Project expansion, Luna's Pocket Galaxy was released as a 7-mana spell. That read, change the cost of minions in your deck to 1. Luna's Pocket Galaxy went through a large number of different iterations during development. One crazy version of the card featured the text, open a portal. You can drag your spells into the portal to summon minions of the same cost, which would open a portal as an extra UI element on the player's screen for a single turn. However, according to Peter Whalen, a former Blizzard employee and the senior game designer at the time, we had a lot of crazy stuff going on in this set. We didn't need to spend all of our UI resources on this card. Another iteration, closer to the final release version, was an 8-mana spell known as Nally's Uber Portal, which set the cost of minions in the player's deck to 0 rather than 1. However, the 0-mana version could have been quite dangerous due to combos like using Book of Specters and drawing 3 powerful minions all at the same time on the following turn, and then playing them all for 0 mana. The change to 1 mana barely affected the flavor of the card, but had a significant impact on how it was used. Interestingly enough, we can kind of see some of those old versions have been revisited in the years to come, but concerning the version of Luna's Pocket Galaxy we did get, it was unfortunately kind of, for almost the first year, a card that was maybe fun to play, had some potential, was decent, but had potential for a lot more, and was kind of a little bit underwhelming from a power level perspective. Although, not at all as weak as the buff it received would have indicated. You see, 10 months after it came out, it was buffed to, instead of costing 7 mana, to now costing 5, which means that as early as turn 4 with the coin, you could make every minion from the rest of the game in your deck cost 1, and you're only sacrificing that turn 4 or 5 to do so, instead of an entire, extremely impactful, often nearing the end of the game, turn 7. It's hard to find footage of 5-mana LPG, as they kind of immediately realized the mistake that they'd made and re-nerfed the card not even 3 months later, putting it back to 7 mana. They didn't even decide to settle for a subtle buff and leaving it at 6. They just fully undid what they did before. LPG at 5, though, allowed pretty much just about any mage deck you wanted to play to now be pretty significantly relevant and impactful. Here's a video of Mark playing an Exodia mage deck using Archmage Antonidas and Sorcerer's Apprentice. Here in this footage of Ali Straza, you see kind of a more traditional list where you're playing generally just expensive minions of value and having a kind of control deck with a powerful set of legendaries that cost a lot of mana that now would cost 1 as your top end. Whether you were fully in on combo or more in on control with a side of combo, your deck was quite significantly strong, being able to cheat out absurd amounts of mana. And in the case of one 9-mana legendary, you've already saved more mana than you played with Luna's Pocket Galaxy. And it being that early in a relatively tame 2019 meta meant you were really not dying by playing it unless you were getting hyper aggroed, which is not anything like it is today. All in all, this is the poster child of a buff hurting more than it helps, because the card immediately went from kind of okay to just bonkers powerful overnight, and then had to be reverted back to 7 mana not even 3 months later, and in the years to follow would still be good in a lot of decks at 7 mana, to the point that there are now people reminiscing about the fact that somehow, someway, LPG used to cost 5 mana. Absolutely hilarious time in Hearthstone with a questionable buff, but I, for one, am always a fan of them taking risks like this, and they can always just undo it like they did here. Our second card from the Rise of the Mech event is much less exciting and flashy than Luna's Pocket Galaxy. We have Extra Arms, a card that also came out in the Boomsday Project set as a 3-mana priest card that read, give a minion +2/+2, add more arms to your hand that gives +2/+2. This is essentially a twin spell card before twin spell existed, barely predating it just the year before. They decided that this card was underwhelming or not powerful enough at 3 mana and just decided to give it a little buff, bringing it down to 2 mana. However, at 2 mana, suddenly not only are you saving a mana on the first extra arms, but you were also saving a mana on the more arms. 2 mana extra arms enabled things like Zoo Priest, which sounds like a contradiction that shouldn't be allowed, where you'd play lots of 1 and 2 mana minions and you'd buff them with cards like Extra Arms, Inner Fire, Magic Carpet, Divine Spirit, etc., and allowing you to have an aggro deck that kind of spammed the board, but also what happened to have minions with huge health to win the game with the Divine Spirit Inner Fire combo as a finisher. This buff also turned out to be quite strong and put the card in a spot that they felt was too strong, and so they brought it back. Up next, we have a more modern card, Conniving Conman. Rare rogue minion from the Perils in Paradise set, released as a 4-mana 4/4 with the words Battlecry, replay the last card you've played from another class. It is yet another card along the lines of the Thief Rogue mini archetype within the class's identity, where you steal cards from other classes and you play them, and with this card you play them again. However, like most Thief Rogue cards, if that's all it did, we would have no reason to talk about it. However, less than a month after the card and its expansion came out, the devs said, since the launch of Perils in Paradise, we've been happy to see a lot of evolving strategies, but we think there's still room for more new and interesting cards to get a chance to shine. So they wanted to add more competitive options from Perils in Paradise, as well as curve power level down of a few cards, and in that patch they buffed Conniving Conman to now say Battlecry, replay the last card you've played from a non-rogue class. You see, to a rogue, those two sentences from another class and from a non-rogue class are identical. From a Thief Rogue perspective, this card has not changed. What's important to understand with the Perils in Paradise set is the new keyword that came out with the set, Tourist. The new keyword Tourist is the Mirren and Azeroth's hottest new tourist attraction. Each class gets one legendary tourist card that lets them vacation to another class during deck building. Put your tourist into your deck, and their destinations class's Perils in Paradise cards get instantly added to the deck building interface, letting you put them into your deck like your main class cards. That's the thematic wording that they've given for tourists. Essentially what it does is, if in this case you're a paladin per se, and you put the tourist card from Perils in Paradise, Sunsapper Lanessa, in your deck, it has the text Rogue Tourist, as well as York spells that cost 2 or less cast twice, but we don't need that for this discussion. What the Rogue Tourist allows you to do is, if you put this in your deck, you are now able to also put rogue cards from the Perils in Paradise set also into your deck. So, as a paladin, you could put Conniving Conman in your deck, and when it says replay the last card you've played from another class, that now requires you to generate or steal a card from a different class in order to get the use of Conniving Conman. However, after the buff, it now just replays the last paladin card you played, whether it be Call to Arms, Holy Wrath, Timeout, etc. You are playing a powerful card that you chose to play once a second time while developing a 4-mana 4/4 alongside of it. This was how it shined problematically in Wild following the buff. However, you don't re-nerf it, which they did 3 months later, if it's only a problem in Wild while it's still being played in Standard. The reason the devs decided to re-nerf it was because it was also a playable card with the Tourist in the Mage class, Portalmancer Skyla. Portalmancer Skyla has the text Rogue Tourist as well. So if you put Portalmancer Skyla in your deck, you are now able to play rogue cards from the Perils in Paradise set. So how this particularly became a problem immediately is now in Big Spell Mage, the deck designed around playing large, big spells that cost your entire late game turns to play, you suddenly can play a card like Tsunami or Sunset Volley or the Galactic Projection Orb, right? You play that maybe for full cost if you're forced to. Maybe you make it cheaper using the previously mentioned Portalmancer Skyla. You can then now replay those cards using Conniving Conman, again while developing a 4-mana 4/4 alongside of it. This gave you significant increase in your consistency to be able to play big spells, and significantly increase the power level of this archetype. So much so that this card was buffed in August of 2024, and then re-nerfed later in November of 2024, just a little more than 3 months later. This is a situation where they wanted to, as they said, try to introduce new competitive strategies from the Perils in Paradise set, and they were successful. They just felt like maybe what they did was too strong and actually hurt more than it helped. More recent theme, we have Edwin, Defias Kingpin, a legendary rogue minion from the Dead Mines mini set, which was the mini set accompanying the United and Stormwind expansion. Edwin released as a 4-mana 4/4 that read, Battlecry, draw a card. If you played it this turn, gain +2/+2 and repeat this effect. The idea was that it was kind of a later game minion you'd play, draw a few cards, make a big body, and it was kind of a nice draw enabler, thematic Edwin, thematic to rogue type of card. However, about 9 months after it came out, they decided to buff the card, changing it from a 4-mana 4/4 to a 3-mana 3/3. The text was unchanged. Almost immediately, it became clear just how important that 1 mana was. Whether it be something in Wild where you're doing some absurd turn 1 decks where you'd counterfeit coin, regular coin out Edwin, and play a bunch of 0-mana minions and spells to get like a 30/30 Edwin and draw your whole deck, or if you were just playing it as it was originally intended, where you just kind of drop it in the mid to late game and draw a bunch of cards, having it be a mana cheaper not only meant you could do it earlier, but it often meant that it would be 2/2 bigger and you'd draw more cards. It was one of those buffs where it didn't just save you a mana, it also gave you an extra card, gave you more stats, etc. And so one buff showed itself in many, many ways. This is a card that, again, they just wanted to give it some extra power, and they thought that the rogue class perhaps was struggling at the time, and so they chose to buff this particularly powerful draw generator in the rogue class, but that perhaps hurt more than they helped, and less than a month later reverted the nerf, making it a 4-mana 4/4 again. I have fond memories of that less than a month, playing the silly coin Edwin on turn 1 to make a massive minion deck, or just kind of having a bonkers card in any Miracle Rogue or any Big Giants Rogue, or really any rogue deck you were playing at the time. Just a solidly fitting example of a card that was buffed that led to more harm than good. Our next card is Treasure Distributor. Very similar to Edwin Defias Kingpin, the developers at some point in time felt that aggro, and a little bit more leaning toward rogue, needed increased power level. So they increased the power of Treasure Distributor to try to help out. Treasure Distributor was printed as a 1-mana 1/2 pirate neutral card from the Whizbang's Workshop set that said, after you summon a pirate, give it +1 attack. A perfectly fine, even good early aggro pirate minion that synergizes with every pirate in existence as you're playing this as early as you possibly can and following it up with as many cheap pirates as you possibly can. This card, to me, illustrates perfectly why buffs have severe risk. You see, this card was buffed to increase the power level of a deck or a class, rather than to increase the power level of the card specifically. Or in other words, the card was performing well. The card was performing fine. The card did not need a buff for the sake of the card to be a viable tool players could use. The card was already good. It's a 1-mana 1/2 pirate that synergizes with every pirate. This is a very solid card. The problem was, at the time, the reason it wasn't being played in good decks at mass is because at the time there weren't enough other pirates, there weren't enough other weapons, there weren't enough synergy to build a deck with this card. It was not the power level that was the problem, it was the lack of options, the lack of tools to go with it in the standard mode. So when they inevitably buffed it to instead say, after you summon a pirate, give it and this minion +1 attack. Suddenly, you now had a mana worm that not only grew its attack when you summoned pirates, but also gave attack to the other pirates that were being summoned. As you can imagine, now, instead of having a 1/2 that is buffing all these pirates and helping you build a big board, you now are building a massive glass cannon as well as buffing your other minions. So it went from a card that was good and just needed more help alongside of it to a card that was absolutely turbo busted and needed help to go alongside of it. But because in standard it still didn't have enough help to go alongside of it, the card wasn't immediately a problem in the mode. In Wild, however, as you can imagine, with cards like Patches the Pirate and plenty of cheap pirates, even some that are free like Brigand, you had essentially a neutral pirate package, like back in the main streets of Gadgetzan, that was now, 2.0, 3.0 version of that you could go in any aggro deck that you wanted. And aggro reached a point in Wild where it was the entire meta evolved around various different aggro decks that all revolved around Treasure Distributor and the pirate package. When it finally got to the point that it was a little too strong and a new expansion was coming in that they wanted to make room for, they left this dev comment. This round of changes is focusing on preparing for our next expansion, the Great Dark Beyond. As we plan for the post-launch meta, our focus is primarily on adjusting harsh play patterns like fast board floods, powerful board wipes, huge life swings, and cards that get endgame cards out too quickly. Some of these are reversions to prior changes. Our balanced philosophy remains that we'll try to make the best changes for the game in each specific patch window, and not be afraid to revert changes when they don't work out or the circumstances are no longer right for them. The part of this in question that is calling out Treasure Distributor is the line about fast board floods, being this was a card that not only encouraged fast board floods, but also grew as a huge minion in itself, which was just a little bit too strong as soon as it had basically anything to go along with it. And it's also being kind of alluded to in terms of they're not afraid to undo something if it no longer is working out. And this is one of those situations where kind of from the get-go we were like, yeah, this isn't gonna work out. This card itself is turbo good. This card's really good. The card wasn't the problem. Even today, now that it's been reverted back to just giving the minion to summon +1 attack, the card is still a good card. Obviously stronger in Wild than Standard, but still the point is that it was not the card's fault that it wasn't seeing play. The card's power level was not the problem. And so when you buff something that is already good to try to help out a class or deck, as soon as that card has enough support around it, it becomes a lot more clear that, oh, this card is in fact turbo busted. So Treasure Distributor, another good case of a buff that hurt more than it helped. But if it annoyed you, thankfully their modern philosophy is that they change cards a whole lot more often. This next card is a bit different than the others and doesn't quite follow our buffed and then nerfed pipeline that we've been going through. And it's also a bit of a hot mess. Up next we have Wild Pawn Knoll. Because it doesn't fit as clearly and there's a whole lot we could talk about with this card, I'm going to omit basically all of it and kind of just throw it in here as an honorable mention. Wild Pawn Knoll released late November 2021 as a 5-mana 4-attack minion. 2 months later, in late January 2022, it was nerfed to now be a 6-cost 3-attack minion. 4 months later, the same year, 2022, it was then buffed to have the original cost of 5 and the original attack of 4. They're all over the place with this card, and we're just getting started. Less than 1 month later, they decided, okay, we went back, and we shouldn't have gone all the way back, and then they brought it down to 3 attack, keeping the cost at 5. 6 months after that, they changed the card yet again, and they changed the text on the card this time to, instead of reading Rush, costs 1 less for each card you've added to your hand from another class, to instead say Rush, costs 1 less for each non-rogue class card added to your hand this game. And then, as if that wasn't enough, a year and 7 months later, with it in this state, having already been changed 5 times, they then nerfed it again to cost 6. So it is now a 6-mana 3/5 with worst taxes in the worst form it's ever been. It got nerfed, it got buffed, it got half nerfed, it got another nerf I hadn't seen before, and then it got another nerf. The card is all over the place. But technically, just for the sake of brevity on this list, it was buffed and then later nerfed, kind of in the middle of all those changes. This card is just, it's a hot mess. It was a card that was used mostly with Maestra until that text change I talked about where it no longer could do that. It was broken in Wild, pretty darn good in Standard. And there's like 17 different versions of this card. I mean, what a hot mess. Our last and final card doesn't quite follow the same eyeball test that the other cards would. It was technically buffed and then nerfed, just like every other card, but the buff on paper, using your eyeballs, is a nerf, and so it requires proper context to understand. The card in question is Tsunami, releasing as an 8-mana mage spell from the Perils in Paradise set that reads summon 3 3-attack 6 health water elementals that freeze. They attack random enemies. This is a card that was primarily used in big spell mage, right? It's a mage spell and it's big. It costs lots of mana. Or else are you going to use it? Control, or Big Spell Mage. If Big Spell Mage is good, you can bet you're going to use it in Big Spell Mage if the card's good enough, right? There's not always a lot of options in standard for big spells. So if Big Spell Mage has support and minions and other stuff around it, you're going to grab the big spells that sort of even do something, right? So Big Spell Mage, a deck we've talked about earlier in this video with the Conniving Conman nerf, reappears in this video for Tsunami. You see, less than a month later, they adjusted Tsunami in the same patch that they buffed Conniving Conman as another way to try to bring up the power level of some of the archetypes from Perils in Paradise. But what they did to buff it was as such: 10 mana, summon 4 water elementals that freeze, they attack random enemies. So instead of 8 for 3, you're now paying 10 mana for 4. In the eye test, that's just a nerf. This costs 2 more mana, and you're now paying a whole 10 mana turn to be able to use the card. However, whether it be something like Bordelmancer Skyla that could happen to hit it and bring its cost down, having a bigger text is better if you can reduce the cost of the card. Another example would be the Galactic Projection Orb, a card I briefly mentioned earlier. What that card actually does is it's a 10 mana spell that says recast a random spell of each cost you've cast this game. So if you're recasting it, right, any card that may do this, if you're recasting Tsunami, you don't care how much it costs, you just care about its text. So that's what they did to Tsunami. They made it cost more, but they made it more powerful because you're either trying to cheat the mana of it lower or you're trying to replay it. Perhaps even with a card like Conniving Conman. There's a whole play pattern here of how the deck works and how the card was used that we could go more into, but that would be a little bit redundant seeing as we already talked about Big Spell Mage with Conniving Conman, and really we're focused here on the card that was buffed and then later nerfed. Because no more than 2 months later, with Tsunami as a 10 mana card that summoned 4, they reverted it entirely to be an 8 mana card that summoned 3 yet again, because they wanted to make room for the next expansion, the Great Dark Beyond. Just like we mentioned earlier with Treasure Distributor, it was the same patch. Hearthstone these days has gotten into the habit of making cards too strong to fix kind of new cool cards not seeing play, and then just completely undoing it or weakening them when new stuff comes around. Normally, you just see completely fine cards get whacked to make room for new cards, but sometimes you see cards that were brought up get brought back down. Thanks for watching this video on when buffs hurt more than they help. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Check out this video here that YouTube thinks you'll like. Click it right there. Click it now.